81. 81, yes.
You really should start announcing that every show, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well, speaking of shows, let's get to the point of this week's, and that is cannibalism in the Old West. And we'll begin with the alpaca story. Alpaca. Now, I should note that there is a song by C.W. McCall, the guy that did the song. C.W. McCall, the guy that recorded Convoy, he did a song about alpaca called Coming Back for More. It's actually one of the scariest songs I've ever heard. Alpaca was born November 21st, 1842, raised in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. At 19, the Civil War, when he was 19, I should say, the Civil War broke out, and he enlisted in the 16th U.S. Infantry in Winona, Minnesota. He was honorably discharged before New Year's Day due to his epilepsy. In June of 1863, he attempted to join the 8th Regiment of the Iowa Cavalry and was mustered out also due to his epilepsy. From that point on, for the next 10 years, he wandered around the mining camps doing odd jobs. At one point, he and 20 other prospectors found themselves in Bingham Canyon, Utah, and wanted to head east intent on going prospecting in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado.
Bingham!
Well, different.
Not the same Bingham, I know, but...
But Al and 20 other prospectors left Bingham Canyon, Utah, and headed east, intent on going prospecting in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado.
I see.
It was quite a winter that year, as they only made it to Chief Uray's camp at the mouth of Dry Creek, not Creek, 2 miles south of Delta, Colorado in January 1874. They arrived hungry and desperate.
See.
The chief tried to convince them not to go on into the mountains. He tried to convince them to wait until spring, because in the mountains, snow couldn't fall so fast that it could bury you. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, there's, avalanches and all sorts of other things, all sorts of other problems. And the Native Americans at the time, who had been dealing with winters for years and knew what they were like, were telling them, don't go do this. Right. So it's at this point, it's like an episode of Friday the 13th, right? A Friday the 13th movie. You got the, don't go there. We're going to go there anyway. Don't go there. We know something.
I'm going in.
We're going to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
So the prospectors got together, and they had gold fever so bad, which gold fever isn't even a real disease, Krysta, just in case you're wondering. But they had gold fever so bad, they just couldn't wait. Now, Chief Uray was an Ute, U-T-E. I'm not sure.
Gold fever would be like a very,
Gold fever just means they wanted gold. That's all it means. They were obsessed with finding gold, which a lot of miners were back in the time.
Miners?
Yeah, they were prospectors, miners.
Oh, miners, not miners. Okay.
Yeah.
Spelled the same way, different meanings. Okay.
Like dwarves, miners.
I know, like, not children miners.
Exactly.
Right. M-I-N-E-R-S, as opposed to M-I-N-O-R.
Oh, yeah. I forgot. So cool.
But the idea was that these guys were going to hire Alpaca as their guide. He was going to lead them through the mountains and go to the Los Pinos Indian Agency on Cushtopa Creek between Saguache and Gunnison. So he was supposed to lead this group. Well, they left on February 9th, 1874. And they wandered into the San Juan Mountains from Chief Uray's camp. And it was a 75-mile trip. But they started out thinking it was only 40 miles and they carried only a 10-day supply of food.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Now, that's according to one of Packer's versions of the story, and Packer told 3 versions, so we don't know.
I see.
Only one man emerged on the other side of the mountains the next April.
And that was Packer.
And that was Packer. Now, one thing people noticed about him is he was flush with cash. And this is a guy who had never been flush with cash. Ever. Not super successful R. Al Packer.
I see.
And so he was flush with cash, and he was flashing around like he had one of the guys on the trip was Israel Swan, and he had Israel Swan's pistol. Everybody who knew Israel Swan knew he had Israel Swan's pistol, and he did not have it before. Now, Packer said that Israel died on the trail because he was like a 60-year-old man, and that he had passed on the pistol to Al because Al did not have one. And since Israel wasn't going to need his anymore.
Gotcha.
Now, Parker also claimed to have, stumbled into the Los Pinos Indian Agency, arriving there on April 16th, 1874, after this long, harrowing journey in which sooner or later every member of the...
Wait, did you just want to say what I thought you said?
What did you think I said?
Heroin? No. Okay.
No heroin. But, like I said, supposedly he came to this Indian agency after a months-long harrowing journey in which he and several members of the group had been trapped together in these frozen mountains. And according to him, people died of natural causes, and the group were forced to eat them. Eventually, there were enough questions, and enough people were who didn't buy the answers. Like, for example, when he was at the Pino Indian Agency, he claimed that he stumbled in there, but the people who saw him in there said he seemed well fed. He seemed very well put together. He didn't seem like he'd come out of a harrowing situation. And furthermore, he had Israel Swan's gun, and he told people that Swan gave it to him on the trail because he didn't have one, and he'd need one, and so Swan was taking care of him. But the thing is people who knew Swan said that he absolutely wouldn't do something like that, especially not just give away his gun like that. So there were way too many unanswered questions. In the back of
what stuff? Cannibalize?
Yeah, cannibalize.
Okay.
So there were so many unanswered questions, and that they sent people to look for everybody else in the mountains to see if they died that way. And what they found was all these bodies grouped together and buried in the same kind of general place. So if things happened as he said they did, and these people died at various times, then he wasted a lot of time carrying people back to this community burial pit that he had. And so that just raised even more questions. So what it looked like was that perhaps there had been some sort of fight, maybe. People who were starving to death certainly get testy, and he was supposed to be the guide, so he was supposed to be the guy in charge of finding the food, and with them not having any, I think things sort of had turned against him, and he sort of laid into these people, and it was a situation where he was defending himself, but maybe more than he needed to. And so he gets carried away and he commits all these homicides. And, at some point he identifies that he's got a lot of meat going to waste. And so decides to help himself to some of that. Right. So according to this one, when Packer comes back from exploring, because he's the guide, he finds these people sitting around eating someone that's already passed.
That's where the cannibalism comes in.
And so he claims that he never did anything wrong or anything that other people weren't already doing. Now, I have a feeling if this had occurred now somehow, and they had examined those bodies to see if any of them had eaten the others, I don't think they'd find any evidence. So, on April 6, 1883, Al Packer's trial begins at the Hinsdale County Courthouse. During the trial, it came out that Packer said he'd had a struggle with Bell and had shot him in self-defense. But it was Swan's remains that showed evidence of a hand-to-hand struggle, and that was ample evidence of a more violent situation than Packer had admitted to. When Packer took the stand in his own defense, he went for more than 2 hours telling quite a few new lies along the way. In particular, he lied about his age, the nature of his military service, the cause of his epilepsy, and the fact that he'd been discharged from the Army twice because of his epilepsy. He denied killing anyone except Wilson Bell, and he said that killing was done purely in self-defense. He did admit to eating portions of Bell and Miller. On Friday, the 13th of April, 1883, Packer was convicted of the premeditated murder of Israel Swan.
Wow.
One local newspaper quoted Judge Jerry as saying, "Stand up, you voracious man-eating son of and receive your sentence.
Watch your language!
When you came to Hinsdale County, there was 7 Democrats, but you ate 5 damn ya."
Put a trigger warning on this episode.
I'm gonna believe it. There's only 2. Anyway, it goes on like this for a while. But the weird thing, or the odd thing is, it was shortly after this, Al Packer escapes. Vanishes. They can't find him in Colorado. He's gone. Eventually they find him like 10 years later, and he winds up serving time, I want to say, in like Minnesota or Montana, someplace like that. Someplace within it.
But not Missouri.
But not Missouri.
Because that would have stuck out.
So,
like a munch thumb.
but the judge at the time felt like emergency cannibalism had become so common in the West that he wanted to make an example of Packer so people stopped doing it. Now, Packer was finally released from prison in 1901 because he was suffering from Bright's disease. He was offered a job as a sideshow freak with the Sells Floto Circus, but he took a guard job at the Denver Post instead. Shortly after that, he moved to Deer Creek Canyon in Jefferson County and spent the rest of his life managing 2 mines and dealing with his stomach and liver ailments. Neighbors said he was a kind man and that he loved telling children stories of his exploits in the mountains. He died of a stroke on April 24th, 1907, and he had been collecting military disability pensions of $25 a month since sometime during his imprisonment. He was buried at government expense as befitting a veteran of the Civil War.
Wow.
So, that's Al Packer. The Donner Party is kind of a different story. Al Packer...
Before you move on to that, should we take time?
Oh, we will, but I have a point.
Okay.
I promise. Al Packer's story was one of grief. The Donner Party story was one of bad luck. But before we get into it, we're going to take a few minutes for a word from our sponsor.
Sorry.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Say your thing.
I do feel very sponsored. Thank you.
Now, the Donner Party, sometimes called the Donner Reed Party, their thing was